because I did have this dual lens as a physician and as a patient. And I knew I could explain our culture and how it could be that we could say things like she's circling the drain or we're losing her, or she's trying to die on me. How we could say that and not know what it meant that we were saying it. And so I felt this really profound sense of obligation, knowing that all of our patients experience this, but may not have the language or the context to be able to really contextualize it in the same way. And at the same time, I feel really ashamed about that. It's a unique culture that we have. It's very insular.
Welcome to How I Doctor, where we're bringing joy back to medicine. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rana Awdish, pulmonologist, critical care physician, and medical director of care experience at Henry Ford Health in Detroit. Rana is also the author of In Shock, a book that has changed the way a lot of doctors, including myself, walk into a patient's room. And her new book, Aftershock, comes out in June. Rana, I think, is one of the most thoughtful physicians when it comes to communicating hope, compassion, and what medicine can and should learn about communicating with patients at all. One of the many lessons is that language we use matters way more than we think, not just ethically, but clinically. And she spent the last decade trying to prove it inside a real health system with real data and a specific list of words she now calls never words. I'll be back with Rana after this word from our sponsors. Before we jump into the episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Evidently. Evidently is the clinical data intelligence platform built to help physicians harness the ocean of patient data they're drowning in every day. From chart summarization to AI-assisted note drafting and denial appeal support, Evidently makes sure the right data shows up at the right time. Physicians using Evidently report spending less time hunting through charts and more time focusing on patient care. That's why they've become a trusted partner to health systems looking to improve documentation, quality, and revenue sustainability. The company is led by providers and AI researchers that are dedicated to reducing documentation burden and helping clinicians practice at the top of their license. If you want to see what Evidently can do for your hospital or your practice, reach out today at www.evidently.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. Before we jump into the episode, I want to thank our newest How I Doctor sponsor, Savaro. Savaro is a top telestroke and neurology company that was built to fix one of the most predictable failures in modern medicine, getting timely, consistent access to a neurologist when you actually need one. Their team of board-certified neurologists deliver rapid video response, clear decision-making support, and continuity from the first exam all the way through treatment planning and management. Hospitals working with Savaro see faster door-to-needle times, fewer transfers, and measurable improvements in patient outcomes. And because Savaro was built by physicians, the workflows actually match real-world medicine. If you need stronger, faster, and more predictable neurology coverage, visit savaro.com to learn more. And now, let's get into today's episode. Dr. Rana Awdish, welcome to How I Doctor.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you again. You know, we started talking after I read your book, and then we were like Twitter friends back before the now dark times of Twitter. So it's really good to reconnect with you.
It's really good to see you too. I miss the med Twitter days. That was actually a beautiful community.
It really was. You know, Rana, for this interview, I was rereading the beginning and the end of your book. And, you know, rereading it, I don't know, I think it moved me in a very different way because I'm no longer an early career physician. Do you think of things differently when you go back and look at passages? Do you think of yourself as a different person than you were when you wrote it?
I do. I'll be honest, I don't revisit the text much. I have a kind of calcified idea of what I've written, and I haven't revisited it. But when I think about that book and that period of time, I feel myself trying so hard to make sense of like an incomprehensible experience and just narrative sense making. And like, if I can create a narrative arc where I was sick and I got better and then there was redemption, then all of this will make sense what happened to me. And I can feel recovered. And it sort of breaks my heart that like, even in my healing, I was still acting like a doctor. Like, how can I use my brain to make it better so
Yeah.
that I don't have to feel my
Yeah.
feelings? And how can I, turn my attention to the culture of medicine, which kind of feels like an easier problem to solve than the problem of living in my body, right? So it's wild to me that no one just pulled me aside and was like, there's this thing called therapy that people like go to and post ICU clinics, and there's help for people like you. But this is what happened.
Yeah, there is that meme, men will do anything to avoid going to therapy. And I wonder if to some degree that's true of physicians as well,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
I'll just read the opening line from your book. Medicine can be a magical lens through which to view the human body. I think that's very true. And then as you go through and describe in the rest of the book, it's a magical lens, but it's also kind of a limited lens in the way that we objectify symptoms and diseases and categorize people and their diseases as well.
Absolutely. There's something really transformative about the lens that you can take symptoms and objective physical exam findings and transmute them into a diagnosis and potentially a treatment. But it's also a very narrow slice of who the person is. And I think we overprivilege the scientific data and our cognitive ways of healing at the expense of the whole person
Yeah.
sometimes.
I think this is one of the most important books I've read to reframe the way I understand my patients. And I think it's because you are a physician. There's a weird trust that I have with other physicians who I might not agree with, but because they are a physician, I have a weird level of maybe it's kind of like a deference for their lived experience that I trust or believe more than other people's.
And you're speaking to at least part of why I felt obligated to write about my experience, because I did have this dual lens as a physician and as a patient. And I knew I could explain our culture and how it could be that we could say things like, she's circling the drain, or we're losing her, or she's trying to die on me. How we could say that and not know what it meant that we were saying it. And so I felt this really profound sense of obligation, knowing that all of our patients experience this, but may not have the language or the context to be able to really contextualize it in the same way. And at the same time, I feel really ashamed about that, because everything that I knew, my patients had been saying, my patients knew. And why is it that we believe a doctor when they say it? And when patients say it, it's like, well, they don't understand what we're going through. Like, it's it's a unique culture that we have. It's very insular.
One of my mentors called medical training the best human behavior modification program the world has ever seen.
Mm,
That,
mm.
and he had been in the military as well. Like he really felt like it was really good at taking unformed clay and forcing it through the kiln of medical training and lack of sleep and too much work and stress and to behave and view the world from one particular frame.
Yeah, that process of identity formation that's like inherent in our training, and that desire to acculturate to this group that you want to belong to, I think a lot of harm is done just under that umbrella.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting when you first published the book, I think you've said that you expected to be fired
Yeah,
when it
yeah.
came out. They didn't fire you. Why? I guess why did you think that that was going to be the outcome?
So I knew I had written a book that was critical of the health system I worked in, no matter how you spun it. It was honest, it exposed our failures, and it was true. And I live with an attorney who, that was when he read it, was his advice to me, was you have to prepare that they're not going to like this. And I don't know what that means for you, but you have to not assume that they're just going to let you go about your business. And to my surprise, I was met with a lot of acceptance and even this understanding of like everything you've talked about in this book is something that happens everywhere. We are not unique. This is not a Henry Ford thing. This is a medicine thing. And wouldn't it be cool if we got to be part of that change? And how can we help you build that? And that's why I'm here 20 years later, to admit that we're a learning organization and that we welcome error disclosure should not be so revolutionary. We know that's a best practice to name the errors we see and to work with transparency to make them better, but it's not really the culture of medicine.
Well, I mean, I loved your point, just being a learning institution. That implies that there are things that you can improve on. If there's nothing left to learn, you're no longer a learning institution anymore. You've learned everything. And so just saying that part of the role of medicine, whether you're an academic hospital or a community hospital, is learning and training and education and teaching, fundamentally implies that there will always be things that everyone can improve on.
No, and you and I probably both trained during a time where it was almost like we were sorted into good apples and bad apples. And there wasn't this sense of a skill set that was developing and everyone growing together. It was like the stars and the people who struggled. And, we had two of my co-residents die by suicide, partly because of that, because they were labeled as not fit for the work, and they internalized that.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I lost a friend from med school to suicide as well. In that same analogy of like firing things through the kiln, you better fit the mold. I'm keeping up with the analogy here, but like you better.
It's a very nice analogy.
Yeah, I just came up with it. You better fit the mold because this is the way to practice medicine, and this is the right way to approach whatever it is. Rapid AFib rate control or rhythm control. And actually, it's interesting because when you get on the attending side, you realize that two attendings could treat the exact same disease process and have totally different approaches that are perfectly acceptable to everybody, too. A quick word about today's sponsor, Evidently. Their platform turns an ocean of fragmented clinical data into concise, actionable insights. Chart summaries, note drafting, denial appeal support, HCC capture, so you spend time caring, not chasing. A transplant surgeon at a large academic medical center recently took transplant referral review from 2 hours to 20 minutes with AI-assisted chart review from Evidently. Physicians deserve workflows that improve accuracy, reduce exhausting chart biopsy, and help us practice at the top of our license. If you want to see how this might work in your hospital or your department, go to evidently.com. That's evidently.com to get started today. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Savaro. If you've ever waited and waited for a neurologist to call you back, you know the problem that Savaro was built to fix. Savaro is a physician-led telestroke and neurology company that delivers rapid virtual neurology coverage that's reliable. Their board-certified neurologists connect by video in under 45 seconds, and they stay with you through the entire decision-making journey. Hospitals working with Savaro report faster door-to-needle times, fewer unnecessary transfers, and measurable improvements in patient outcomes. If your hospital needs stronger, faster, more consistent neurology coverage, visit Savaro.com to learn more. Is this a necessary step that physicians have to distance ourselves from patients in order to both do the things that we do and not be overcome with emotion and fear, to place a central line, to stick a large needle in someone's neck and say, yeah, I'm just going to do this? Do we fundamentally have to go through that process to separate ourselves? And then we should take the next step, which is to return back toward patients once we become an attending? Or is it more that your view that we actually don't have to do it that way and there's a better way to train human beings to turn them into doctors?
I've come to think about it that we were trained that way because we were trained in a time when there really weren't safe spaces to hold any of the emotional content of our work. We were trained by a generation of physicians who had to bottle it up and keep it down, and that was all they knew. And so all they knew to pass on to us was if you separate it, if you depersonalize, if you extract and objectify, I know you can get through it. And they didn't have a language for it's okay to feel the things, because if you feel that this is a human in front of you, you'll have a medical student hold their hand while you're placing the line, and you'll tell them every step of your central line because they have bodily autonomy, and you'll prepare them because you know that there's an emotional toll to it. And it will be less traumatizing for you because you won't be doing something to an object. I had the experience in my training of we were placing one of the very first central lines I'd ever placed. I trained in New York. It was the epicenter of the HIV epidemic. We were always afraid of needle sticks. This patient was writhing beneath our hands as we were trying to place the line. It was one of the things where we put one person on each limb to hold them steady. And then they went limp, and the line went in, and the supervising physician said, he died some time ago, but he was very wasted, and I thought it would be good practice for you. And I thought, my goodness, like, this wasn't for him. So are the patient's bodies for our education? Do they even have agency over their bodies, right? Like, that blew my mind that we would think that that was our right. And now to see, the residents practice on mannequins in the sim lab before they ever do it on a patient, there's a real thoughtfulness about talking through each step of the placement. It's impossible for me to think that this is not better. And I think as someone who wanted to belong in medicine, I was too willing to just adopt the behaviors, even if my internal conscience said, this doesn't feel right, because I admired the people who were modeling that behavior. And I thought they must know something I don't. This must just be what it is. And that's one of the gifts of aging in medicine is you get to reshape it a bit.
Rana, you published a paper in Mayo Clinic Proceedings called Never Words, and you talk about specific phrases that physicians should stop using and what to say instead. Can you walk me through a few of those and why you came up with that paper and that idea?
Yeah, this was the brainchild of my fabulous co-author, Len Berry, who's one of my favorite writing partners, who actually started his career in marketing, and he's a business school professor. And then he did health sciences research, and our work intersects at the language part. And I remember thinking Never Words sounded very dogmatic, and I wasn't sure I agreed with it
Yeah.
as a title. And then as we started to go through...
It reminds me of like never events.
Yeah.
Like, you should never cut off the wrong limb.
Right.
Like, okay, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And we did a survey of our colleagues. We sort of collected their never words and what they used differently. And I learned a lot in that process. The one that really sticks with me, especially in the ICU, is the word need. It's so common for us to go to a patient's family and say, your mother needs to be intubated. And what we were suggested instead is to redistribute power really back to the family and say, your mother's breathing is getting worse. Can we talk about what that means for her and what options we have? And the way that that recenters on the patient rather than my expertise as a physician, so much of the language work is really about redistributing power. We have hoarded it. We seem to think that we need all of it. And I think with our language, we can really say, my input here is important, and your knowledge of your family member is equally important. We have to bring them together to come to a consensus about what the right thing to do is for her.
I might even wonder if we think having all the power is better for us as physicians, but actually giving some of that power away and actually kind of forcing the other parties that should be involved in some ways might actually even be better for the physician themselves. It may force a conversation that otherwise wouldn't happen or would be more challenging.
It opens doors. I think
Yeah.
for me, I found it quite a relief not
Yes.
to be the holder of that, but to say, my agenda in this moment is not the most important thing. Their values, their knowledge of what a good day looks like for their loved one, that is actually the most important thing in this moment. And then decisions even that I might not have made have a different coherence because they're really framed in the construct of who that person is. For example, if I'm seeing a pulmonary hypertension patient, which is primarily what I treat, and by all the guidelines, this is someone who needs to be on IV therapy. And I know this person would benefit from IV therapy, but this person is a swimmer, like in lakes, and that is their joy, and it is everything that matters to them. If they just say, I don't want IV therapy, just give me a pill, I feel moral injury because I know I'm not treating them to the best of my ability. If I know that they need this aspect of their personhood to feel whole, then I can work within that to feel that I'm actually doing the best thing in aggregate. It might not be the perfect thing from a peer review angle, but in aggregate, it's the perfect thing for this human. And that releases some of that self-judgment that I think we're so quick to put on ourselves.
Brent, I want to move to aftershock in a second, but I just have one question. We met in person at a bridge event in San Diego. I'm curious if you have thoughts about communication and generative AI, because I have such mixed feelings on it. It can often sound more maybe empathetic than what a human doctor might say. You could probably program a model to never use the never words. Have you had thoughts about the wave of generative AI when it comes to communicating with patients?
I have conflicting thoughts about it too. I have this sort of
Yeah.
fantasy that it will offload some of the more administrative tasks and free up space for the relationships that we develop with our patients and the true listening between humans. I really believe that healing is an embodied practice, that it happens in the space between two people who come together, um, and that it's relational inherently. So, can a chatbot mimic a relationship? Yes. Is it an embodied relationship where you genuinely can imagine this thing cares about you and is present for you? I don't know that that is possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Well, let's move to Aftershock, which comes out in June. You're going to get this question 1,000 times, so hopefully mine is one of the first times. Why did you decide to write a second book?
So it's kind of amusing to me that after I wrote the first book and having, essentially died and have multi-system organ failure, half my liver resected, 10 surgeries, I sort of walked around being like, I can't imagine how much more would have to happen for me to have material for another book. And the universe is like, hold my beer, I have this. There was so much that happened. And part of it I alluded to earlier, just that my healing had been very cognitive, and I was doing a lot of speaking about it. Had become a kind of evangelist for compassionate care, and I had this awareness that the healing hadn't actually reached my body. Like, I thought that if I told my body we were healed, that it would believe me, and it didn't. And so I was having a lot of really somatic symptoms. And I had to go on a kind of re-embodiment quest and learn to inhabit a body that felt like a ticking time bomb to me. And I think not an uncommon experience, whether people are dealing with the aftermath of COVID or an ICU admission or just even emotional wounds. It can be a scary place to be with yourself. And what it did was it opened these channels of communication where I got this awareness one day that just said, I'll be dead in 5 years. And it was like undeniable. I didn't know where it came from, but I followed it and I found that I had a cancer. And I really learned that my body was intuitive and trustworthy and wise, where I had always just regarded it as a broken object because I had internalized medicine's view of sick bodies. And that felt like something I needed to say, that felt like a experience that I needed to share, that medicine really lacks reverence for what bodies can do. We, again, hold the power. We want to think of ourselves as healers, but the body is the thing that heals. And I wanted to shift it back so we could have some new conversations.
Who came up with the title Aftershock?
Oh, gosh. So I was at Notre Dame at a cocktail hour that was in support of this session that I had attended. And someone made a joke of like, I've got a title for your second book, Aftershock. Get it? And I was like, oh, haha, no. And then I like told my publisher and they were like, no, that's good. We're going to use that. I'm like, no, 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 we're going to do something like creative and different. And they're like, nope. And it just stuck.
I mean, I love a play on words. I mean, your first book, In Shock, was so, it was so good because it has its more superficial meaning, it has a medical meaning, and then it has, I think, a deeper meaning. And then Aftershock, you get these multiple, it's like, yeah, it kind of works.
It kind of works. And I think about that long tail of illness and the aftershocks of
Yeah.
illness and, the reverberations through your life. And it's aftershock, right?
Totally. Brenna, who did you write Aftershock for?
Primarily, I wrote it for my son. I was writing it at a time where I was pretty sure I was going to die. And that's just kind of a permanent state in my life. But it was more acute because of a new cancer diagnosis. And I felt so strongly that I needed to share my beliefs in a way that my then, preteen child would not be able to absorb. And so part of it was writing it for him so that he would have a record of my beliefs and what our experience as a family was. Part of it was really for anyone who's also found themselves disconnected from their body and unsure of a way back.
We learned about your challenges through all of your critical illness in Shock. Have you found that other people can have that same level of disconnect with their body without having to be critically ill, without having to go through all of the trauma and the challenges you did through their own illness journey?
Oh, I think it doesn't even have to be illness. Like, look at how we functioned as residents, right? Like, you suppress your hunger, you suppress your need for sleep, you try to just function from the neck up. Like, medicine rewards disembodiment. A disembodied physician can work through unreasonable workloads because they're not noticing the impact on their physical being. They're dissociated from it. To some extent, we all do that to get through.
Brenna, what do you hope for as the longer term impact from your writing?
I think the through line through all of my work is really about giving ourselves permission to be more human, to feel the things that we're feeling and not stuff them down. And whether that comes out in writing, a narrative reflective practice, whether that comes out in peer support groups like it did for us during COVID, whether it comes out in an exam room because you're more willing to connect with somebody. I really hope that we understand that the culture of medicine is us and we get to shape it. We really do. And for a long time, I believed that I had to bend to be more in the shape of medicine, and now I think medicine needs to bend to be more in the shape of us.
So much of this is fundamentally under our control. These things that we assume are fixed are not laws of nature. They are not limitations of physics or biology. But so much of the healthcare system, whether it's prior authorization and insurance rules, or it's like that's all made up. It's all fake.
Yep.
It doesn't exist. It's not real.
It's not thermodynamics.
Exactly.
It's a modifiable construct that was built by humans who didn't have a better way, that now we have a better way.
These are all things that fundamentally we as society either accept or created, and that means they can also be changed.
Hallelujah.
Ren, I have to ask if there was a third book.
Mm.
If this is a
Jinxing
trilogy.
me.
No, I'm not jinxing your illness at all. But is there a third layer to this that you've thought about at all?
As I reflected on after the first book, I can't imagine what more would have to happen for there to be material for a third book. And, there are always surprises.
You talk at the end of In Shock. You give some advice to patients and clinicians as well about how to communicate better. Other lessons you've learned since writing In Shock that either are more applicable to 2026 medicine or new challenges that we're seeing kind of post-pandemic that we weren't even aware of were problems at the time?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that I've had to figure out my own approach for, which I think everyone's encountered, is the mistrust and the
Yes.
misinformation. That was I'm saying was like it's gone away, but when it first started, it was a really demoralizing thing to be sitting across from someone that you've been sacrificing your life for, who does not trust you and thinks that you are going to inject them with a microchip. And I ran out of tools. I
Yeah.
am
Me too. Me
honest.
too.
I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna burn it down." Like, all I had was anger and, like, indignation, and I felt like, "What am I doing?" And what I had to locate in myself was just the barest shred of curiosity to be like, "Tell me what this experience has been like for you." And I don't think I even cared about the answer. It was just like the only thing I could say. But what I heard was like, okay, your business was shuttered, or you can't see your grandchildren because you won't get the vaccine. And then you realize, like, oh, you felt isolated. I felt isolated. Oh, you felt powerless. I felt powerless. And like that recognition of the same emotions I was having in the other, someone that I couldn't build a connection with, was the foundation of building a connection. And that curiosity is something that I go to now when I feel I just don't have another tool in my toolbox.
It is a great point that we were all feeling very similar emotions, and we all just had different ways of responding to those really uncomfortable, difficult emotions.
And I think the more we can acknowledge that, the more we have somewhere we can start talking.
Yeah. Ren, I have one more question for you. So much of your book is about the importance of communication. And like you've mentioned, the communication requires a relationship. How do we fundamentally do that when there's mistrust, but there's also just lack of relationship often between clinician and patient? A lot of people don't have PCPs. Some people just go to the urgent care or the ER because they can't access their specialist. Like, how do we fundamentally do this when it feels like time is a necessary ingredient and that feels like one of the least available resources right now?
It's been fascinating to me in my research to learn that the more compassion and empathy we build into a clinical visit, the more efficient it is. That patients are actually less likely to come back to the ER when they feel that their concerns were heard and acknowledged, even if they can't be fixed. That patients are more likely to adhere to the plan of care if they feel their emotions have been addressed. So I think we tell ourselves a story of it takes more time, but the data doesn't actually support that. And we all know that feeling, right? Of someone who's telling you the same story about what happened at the outside hospital, and you're like, oh my God, I know. And they don't feel that you know because you haven't acknowledged the emotion behind the story. And so, in training ourselves to listen differently and decode the emotion that's there and respond differently, we're also giving ourselves a chance to actually be more efficient and get better outcomes and have less returns and less of the clogging of the system. Relationships can be episodic. In an urgent care, it's about agenda setting and saying, okay, what brought you in? That's what you're concerned about. This is what I'm concerned about. Let's find a shape for this visit that suits both of our needs. It can be tactical, it can be devoid of emotion, but it has to meet the needs of both people.
I love that. Well, Dr. Rana Awdish, it has been an absolute pleasure to get to talk to you again. I cannot wait to read your new book, Aftershock. Dr. Awdish, where is the best place for people to find you, find your book?
My website is renaawdishmd.com, and it has all the information about both books and where I'll be doing things and all the fun.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us on How I Doctor today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today. For interviews with physicians creating meaningful change, check out offcall.com/podcast. You can find How I Doctor on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll have new episodes weekly. This has been and continues to be Dr. Graham Walker. Stay well, stay inspired, and practice with purpose.